Okay, morning. You might want to scan the QR code, or if not, just wait to the end of the presentation. We'll show the QR code again. Okay. So the task that's been given to me, actually in the briefing, was to talk about John Calvin. John Calvin, the great theologian, and I had to go and see what he has to say about family and faith. And to my pleasant surprise, I actually discovered that he has got a lot to say, more than I'll be able to cover in these 25 minutes. So I'll try my very best, and if I can't finish all the slides, maybe the organizers will send the slides to you and you can read it from there for yourself. Okay? So let's begin. So I just have 3 points to make about John Calvin on family and faith, but each point is quite substantive in itself. Okay? So the first point. So it's not very sensitive, right? Okay, first point, families play an important role in the creational mandate and the Noahic covenant, that means in whole of society. So this was a point that Calvin recognized, the very vital role that families play in terms of God's organization of the world, God's organization of society. And Calvin didn't differ from what is presented to us in the scriptures. Okay? So the creational mandate is found in Genesis 1:28, and the Noahic covenant is found in Genesis 9:1 to 17. Let me just read for us the creational mandate is found in Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And then I refer us to Genesis 9 for the Noahic covenant. Okay, and I'll just read from chapter 9, verse 1 to 5. Okay? And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Okay? So it's been recognized that the Noahic covenant is really a common covenant that is for all. That means to say that in the Bible, when it comes to the Noahic covenant, it's a covenant that God made with the whole of humanity. And the rest of the covenants in the scriptures that we see, be it the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the New covenant, those are covenants that God makes with His people. Yeah? But the Noahic covenant is unique. It is meant for all. It is a common covenant that God made with humanity. And within this common covenant, we see there's a need for family, there's a need for enterprise, there's a need for judicial institutions in order to carry out the aims of the covenant. That's what we see in Genesis 9:1-5, right? We see the importance of families. We see the importance of institutions that deal with enterprise in terms of the provision of food and economic resources and so forth. And the last one that we see down there that's important is judicial institutions. Institutions that ensure justice is carried out. Yeah? And together, when these three institutions are working together, the family, the enterprise, and the judicial, they work towards what is called a modest moral vision of the common good. That means this is a very modest vision of what is needed, the common good that is needed in society in order for society to function properly. It needs all these three arms to be working. Okay? And so as David Edmund, a reformed theologian, he says this common good is characterized by a sharing in the broad commitment to the good of forming familiar institutions for purposes of procreation and filling the earth, the good of forming enterprise institutions to supply human needs, and the good of forming judicial institutions to promote justice in the face of violence. Okay? In other words, to put it very simply, what is needed for the Noahic covenant to be carried out and which is for all human societies to be flourishing, they need these three institutions: that of the family, that of enterprise, and that of judicial institutions. So in this regard, Calvin, in his commentary on Genesis 1:28, he agrees with this. And he says that this blessing of God is regarded as the source from which the human race has flowed. Yeah? In there. And here he goes on to declare a little bit more about the whole creational mandate and the marriage covenant. And in his commentary on Genesis 9:1, he refers to the same thing. Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. When Moses here says that God blessed Noah and his sons, he does not simply mean that the favor of fruitfulness was restored to them, but at the same time, God's purpose about the new restitution of the world was revealed unto them. To the blessing itself was added God's voice by which he addresses them. The Lord laid before them their future way of life. Therefore, he not only renewed the world through the same word by which he had previously created it, but he directed his word to man in order that they might recover the correct use of marriage. So here Calvin pays quite a lot of particular attention to the family, and in this way they'll know that producing offspring is pleasing to God in itself. Yeah? Okay, and here in his commentary on verse 8, chapter 9, verse 8, this is the point I want to highlight to us. There is no doubt that it was God's plan to provide for all his posterity. This was not therefore a private covenant, confirmed with one family only, but rather Calvin holds that the Noahic covenant is one that is common to all people and will flourish in all ages to the end of the world. Wherefore, relying on this promise, let us look forward to the last day in which the consuming fire will purify heaven and earth. Okay? So this brings us to a point about Calvin and how he saw natural law. Natural law is the law that we can infer from creation, from God's revelation in creation, in order for us to have an understanding of what the moral vision that is there for common society. Okay? So how did Calvin see natural law? Two aspects to consider, I think. Firstly is that I think he had a positive appropriation of natural law. So he says that natural law is able to point us to the moral order in creation. Yeah, it's there. And all of this has come about, and we can see it from natural revelation, meaning that the revelation that God has revealed about himself, his law and order, that he has brought about simply by bringing about creation. Okay? So Calvin, on the one hand, he's got a positive appropriation of natural law. He says that there are certain things that we can discern from the way the moral vision of society is supposed to be. Okay? But yet, at the same time, here is a quote from the Institute, says the law of God, which we call the moral law, is nothing else than a testimony of natural law and of their conscience which God has engraved upon the minds of men. But yet, at the same time, on the other hand, Calvin is also cautious about his appropriation of natural law. And the reason is because Calvin is a realist. He realizes that sin has an impact on our natural reason. And that is, we are not able to understand the true intention of creational moral order. Yeah? So on the one hand, Calvin is saying that there's something that we can positively appropriate about natural law as we look at creation, as we look at revelation. Okay? There's certain things that we can glean from that. But yet, on the other hand, he's also cautious about it. Yeah? And at the end of the day, Calvin says that what we need is scripture revelation. Is we need the revelation that comes from scripture, that comes from God's word, in order to redeem natural law morality. Yeah? Otherwise, the way that we understand natural law morality will always be distorted, because of our sin. So that's the first point I just wanted to highlight about Calvin. Calvin goes with the tradition's way of understanding the place that families play in terms of building up a moral law and order within common society. Okay? The second point I want to highlight to us is that Calvin views that strong marriages play an important role in maintaining strong families. Okay? And for this, I basically took the article from John Wick Jr., John Calvin on Marriage and Family Life in the Calvin Handbook. And allow me to read to us a paragraph from the article itself, which I think summarizes the essence of whatever that John Wick wants to say about John Calvin on marriage and family life. Okay? It's quite a long quote, so bear with me. John Calvin transformed the Western theology and law of sex, marriage, and family life. Building on a generation of Protestant reforms, Calvin constructed a comprehensive new theology and law that made marital formation and dissolution, children's nurture and welfare, family cohesion and support, and sexual sin and crime essential concerns for both church and state. He drew the Consistory and Council of Geneva into a creative new alliance to guide and govern the reformation of the intimate domestic sphere. Okay? Consistory would be the church leadership back in Calvin's day, Geneva. Council of Geneva would be you can call it the government, the magistrate government. So he drew both into a kind of partnership in order to govern this reformation of family life. Okay? Under the inspiration of Calvin and his fellow reformers, the Genevan authorities outlawed monasticism and mandatory clerical celibacy. Okay? So it was no longer mandatory that if you wanted to be a clergy that you had to be celibate. Okay? They removed that. They encouraged marriages for all adults who had the freedom, the fitness, and the capacity to marry. They set clear guidelines for courtship and engagement and firm restrictions on premarital sex and consortium. They mandated parental consent, peer witness, church consecration, and state registration for valid engagement and marriage promises. They truncated the impediments to engagement and marriage and streamlined and opened up procedures for annulment. They made public church weddings mandatory and prepared a new marital liturgy heavy with biblical instruction and congregational participation. They reformed the laws of marital property and inheritance, dowry and dower rights, guardianship and adoption. They created new rights and duties for fiancés before their weddings, for wives within the bedroom, and for children within the household. Next slide. They introduced absolute divorce on grounds of adultery and malicious desertion. They allowed innocent husbands and wives alike to sue for divorce, custody, and alimony. They encouraged the remarriage of divorcees and widowers. They punished adultery, rape, fornication, prostitution, sodomy, and other sexual felonies with growing severity. They put firm new restrictions on dancing, sumptuousness, ribaldry, obscenity, and dissolute songs, literature, and plays. They put firm new stock in catechesis and education of children. They created new schools, curricula, teaching aids for boys and girls. They provided new sanctuaries and opportunities for legitimate, abandoned, and abused children. They created new protections and provisions for abused wives, impoverished widows, and ravished maidens. Many of these reforms introduced by Calvin and his colleagues in 16th century Geneva were echoed and elaborated in the numerous Protestant communities, eventually on both sides of the Atlantic. A good number of these reforms found their way into modern civil law and common law traditions as well. So I just wanted to show you from that quote itself, and the rest of John Wick's article really elaborates on that quote, but I thought that quote was an excellent way to summarize whatever that he wanted to say. Okay? And I think the upshot of it was that Calvin, because of his faith, because of his reformed faith and understanding, really revolutionized the whole of family life and in fact the whole of society in Geneva in his time and in his day. Yeah, in that. And the following slides that I have, I'll just go through them very quickly. So you see that his reforms will carry out 2 new statutes that he was able to establish. Specific to marriage, the doctrine of covenant provided an organizing motive for Calvin's reformation of marriage and consequently family life. Next. And he made public the nature of the marriage covenant. So it involved parents, it involved peers, it involved the minister, it involved the magistrate. Okay, and he removed secret marriages. So nowadays, when we attend a wedding, it's a public wedding, right? It's a public affair, yeah. But a lot of the publicness of this wedding affair was brought about in Calvin's time and in Calvin's day. Okay? Next, carry on. Marriage. He also defined marriage as a heterosexual monogamous union for life, and that helped to define and rule out illicit sexual unions. So monstrous vices such as sodomy, butchery, bestiality, homosexuality, and all other unnatural acts were ruled out. Carry on. Marriages between older men and younger women were also discouraged. Okay, incestuous unions were prohibited. Polygamy was prohibited also. Adultery, and in there Calvin advocated harsh punishment, even execution in notorious cases. Yeah. Separation of husband and wife, Calvin and his government held that without valid reason, they held that to be tantamount to adultery as well. Okay? And the commandment against adultery was equally binding on the unmarried, equally applicable to both illicit sexual activities and various acts leading to the same. Okay. Next. I think we can skip this. Move on. Okay, yeah. And Calvin saw the 3 goals of marriage to be present there. Foster mutual love and support of husband and wife, licit procreation and nurture of children, and protect husband and wife from sexual sin and temptation. Okay? So these were the 3 goals that Calvin understood of marriage, and from there he had a lot of practical guidelines practical lessons in order to help. So for example, he said about prudent norms for courtship. What is a good period of courtship in that sense? Advice against marrying unbelievers. Next, regarded as a serious impediment, sexual dysfunction. So that's why marriages of young children were void, because Calvin understood that they were not able to produce children, for many of these young children before they reach maturity. Yeah. And then on the same count, the same token, unions with eunuchs or those with permanent sexual injuries were also counted as void because they couldn't produce procreation and nurture of children. Okay? It's a different matter if one spouse became sexually dysfunctional after being in marriage. Okay? Carry on. Encourage married couples to maintain a healthy sex life. And if a couple proved barren, Calvin said that was not the opportunity for divorce or anything like that. There were no grounds for that, but instead it was an opportunity to love others that were not of their own. Okay? And even in marriages in which one of the couples proved to be barren, Calvin did not allow for concubinage or divorce in those cases. Okay. Next. Karen? Yeah. Dealing with divorce on grounds of adultery and malicious desertion. Okay, I think we can just go through this. Okay? So that was what Calvin did basically, and once again it's just to bring home the point. I'm sorry I can't go into the details, but to bring home the point that Calvin really revolutionized the whole way family life was organized around Geneva. Okay? And straight away I know as we're thinking about this, some of us are thinking, whoa, if only we can do the same today. There is a difference. Geneva was Geneva back then. It was a commonwealth, so there was a greater, stronger kind of partnership between the government, the civil magistrates, as well as the church. Whereas today it's very much separated in a sense. Okay? The other article that I wanted to draw attention to is this book written by Scott Menesh, Pastors and Their Households. Very fascinating read, where in there he really went into the historical research to show us how life was like for the pastors back in Calvin's Geneva, okay, and within his company of pastors. Okay. Next slide. So chapter explores the pastor's households between 1536 and 1609, okay. And the theological conviction that reverberated throughout European society was the goodness of clerical marriage, okay? And so that was very different from the period before the Reformation, where all clergy couldn't be married. And so you can see down here that nearly all of the 135 ministers who served Geneva's parish churches from 1536 to 1609 were married men, and most had children. Okay? Average age of marriage ranged from 28 to 31 years. Remarriage of widowers and widows was very common, yeah. And marriage between the pastors and their colleagues' daughters was also quite common, okay. So it's a kind of I'm not saying that that should be practiced today, yeah. But anyway, it led to busy households. So in any household of the pastor in Geneva, there were children, there were servants, and there were also boarding students. So these boarding students were people from other countries, the other European cities, who had come to Geneva in order to learn. And when they were in Geneva, they needed a place to stay. And so they became boarding students with many of the pastors. Okay, Karen? I'll read this. Although no document survives describing the day-to-day domestic activities of ministers like Calvin, Koch, Bizarre, Daniel, or Kulat, it is likely that they undertook a variety of practical duties required of the heads of most Christian households. They oversaw the family's financial accounts and correspondence. They supervised the household servants and student boarders. They attended to their children's education. They meted out corrective discipline, and they instructed their sons and daughters in the catechism. Okay? It is likely that many of the countryside ministers experienced a somewhat more rugged existence. In the absence of household servants, their daily duties may have well included feeding livestock, tending a garden, drawing water, or gathering firewood. Many of Geneva's ministers no doubt also conducted daily times of scripture reading and prayer for their households. Okay, thanks. Not all was duty and drudgery though. For many ministers, the love of family and friendships with colleagues added luster to daily life. Okay, so they got together for some games, they wrote poems and letters, and they enjoyed music. Okay? Next one. Example, Beza, Theodore Beza, the successor of John Calvin. He wrote on the birth of his baby chicks. Okay, and maybe you can just go down all the way until Okay, and this was a poem that he wrote when his hen gave birth to baby chicks. Okay, a very nice poem. A hen that I bought for a very small sum bore 15 chicks before 1 month was done. But to you, kind Christ, what fruit have I given during the 77 years I have been living? Forgive me, Lord, and to my humble prayer attend, that I may be your chick, and you to me a hen. Oh, that's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, how many of us in the daily course of doing our work, we stop to write a poem or to express something of our doxology and praise to God? Yeah? And a lot of this was held together because they had a very strong belief in the doctrine of God's providence. Okay? Next. Okay, right? What about emotional quality of pastoral marriages and family life? Okay. Previous scholarship tend to see that marriages and family life in early modern Europe, they were bereft of emotional attachment or affection. Okay? So that was the standard portrayal of it, and it's not altogether correct. So Scott Manesh has shown that really from historical sources it's a twofold report. Yeah? So on some certain instances, you can see that households and marriages were in trouble, but yet on the other hand, via the private correspondence, poetry, occasional journal entries, much intimacy and love was described within the family relationships. Okay? For example, the prayer of Antoine de Chardin on the death of their daughter. I think this was a very moving one. So can I call the next slide? And maybe I'll just read it for us, just to give us a little bit of a pastoral insight into the hearts of the pastors there. Towards noon, which was the hour of her birth, Mary fell asleep in the Lord. She had lived 7 years, 4 months, and 14 days. Her speech and life left her as she was praying to the Lord Jesus. O most high and righteous God, righteous judge of all the earth, I worship your judgments. I recognize that I deserve much more than this so harsh a rule. Have pity on me and my family. Comfort the father and mother who are suffering. Withdraw the scourge of your anger. Do not pass judgment on your servants, Lord, for the sake of the love of Jesus Christ, my Master and Savior. Yeah? So I think it's a heartfelt moment which shows the parental love that Antione had for his daughter. Next. Material and financial support of pastors in relation to their households can carry on. Modest, at times, even legal pastoral support in Geneva's church. And so pastors were supplied parsonage. Some were in a state of disrepair though. Parsonage means living quarters within the church itself. Okay? They were given a quarterly salary, and at one point during very high inflation, the pastors actually requested for payment in nature rather than in coin. So don't give me in terms of money, give me in terms of crops, actual produce, and things like that. Huh? Yeah. And this led managed to say that it seems that Geneva's pastors were not paid particularly well during the generations after Calvin. In the early 17th century, the salary of a countryside minister was roughly equivalent to the annual income of a cobbler's assistant. Okay, so yeah, this is it troubled me a little bit when I read that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and so this is a closing quote that comes from Scott Manners' book. Pastoral vocation in late 16th century Geneva was not at all an ivory tower affair. Geneva's pastors were called to a lifetime of study, godly conversation, Christian proclamation, meditation, and prayer. But this broad, intoxicated manner of life needed to be expressed within and accommodated to an everyday world full of leaky roofs, rising prices, critical neighbors, misbehaving children, sick spouses, and modest wages. The eternal and the mundane were never very far apart. I like that saying, huh? God's work needed to be accomplished in the Christian household as well as in the Christian church. Okay? And I'm sure for all the pastors among us, we can identify with this saying that even as we care for the church, we also have to care for our own family and among all the daily struggles of life itself. Next. Okay. Point 3, I will not go deep into this, but I'll just list it for us. There's a relation between the pastor's shepherding of his family and the church as the family of God. Okay, next slide. And here's just to show us that one of the ways in which Calvin described the church, very familiar saying to him, was he described the church as mother. Nobody can have God as their father without having the church as mother. So in other words, church was not optional for the Christian. Right? In a sense. Okay, so yeah, splash through the points. It's okay, splash through the points. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, cool. Next slide. And then also Calvin saw a strong relation between the pastor as shepherd of his or her family and shepherd of the church. Yeah? And in here Calvin referred to the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy, and can I go on to the next slide please? Okay, and this verse, and Calvin referred to it to say that the pastor must be able to manage his own household well. For if he cannot manage his own household, how then can he care for God's church? Okay? The next slide. And so here is just taken from Calvin's commentary to 1 Timothy. Next one. Next one. Okay? Sorry, can you go back? Next slide? Yeah. So down here, Calvin says, with proper respect, okay, this means that Calvin thinks that a person who is unfit to rule his own family is totally unsuitable to govern a whole group of people. Yeah? In addition to the fact that he does not possess the natural gifts for this task, what kind of authority would a person command among a group of people when his whole family hold him in contempt? Yeah? So this is the basic point that he's trying to bring about here. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Yeah. Show the 3 points. So I'm sorry, I know this is really rushed through, but I just wanted to bring out 3 points that I think we can take home with us today as we look at how Calvin understood faith and family. Firstly, families play an important role in the creational mandate and in the Noahic covenant, the whole of society. Point 2, strong marriages play an important role in maintaining strong families. And lastly, there's a relation between the pastor's shepherding of his or her family and the church as the family of God. Okay? I'm going to ask you a favor, and that is if I can just take 5 more minutes into the Q&A as I bring up some reflection points for us to think through. I mean, history is always good, but we've got to see how we can learn from history in order to adapt it to our circumstances today. Okay? So the 3 reflection points are there. Firstly, I ask myself, is there still a place for natural law arguments in our conception of moral order today? Our societies today are ideologically diverse societies, right? Many different ideas out there. And the lingo among the youth is that we're not to judge each other, don't judge each other's ideas, and so forth. So in such a place, is there still a place for natural law arguments? Yeah? I want to say that with the deconstruction and redefinition of traditional structures of authority, what are the traditional structures of authority that have all been revamped as we enter the modern society today? All 3 aspects have been revamped: religion, family, nation. Okay? All these 3 serve as traditional structures of authority that help to govern our lives. All 3 authorities have been totally revamped and changed. Yeah? So with the change of all these 3 traditional structures, natural law arguments is becoming harder and harder to grasp. Yeah? Next slide. Decline in religious beliefs also lead to the fact that there is no transcendental grounding to the natural in natural law. So whereas last time back in Calvin's day, when he talked about natural law, people recognize, yes, there is a God, so there's some kind of a natural law. But today, when you talk about natural law, they go, what are you talking about? Yeah, what's natural? How do we ground the natural in natural law? Yeah, because we have kicked God out of the picture altogether. Okay? So moving forward, I really think one needs to be realistic how much natural law arguments can achieve in terms of establishing a common societal moral order. Okay? I'll just give you an example. So with the debates leading up to the repeal of 13Apr24, some of us tried to go with natural law arguments, and so forth. But we found that those natural law arguments couldn't really gain traction because what was natural to us didn't seem to be that natural to the younger generation anymore, in that sense. Okay? So, next point. I really think in this regard we need a new notion of Calvin's 2 kingdoms. Okay? And here I'll bring up the slide. So the previous paradigm that Calvin understood was that the church was governed by God's law, whereas society was governed by natural law. Okay? And people in the church could see this very clearly. The common person in society could also see this very clearly, that he or she as a society, they were governed by natural law. What is the current paradigm that is needed? I think the current paradigm is that as the church, we must recognize that we are still under God's law, and because we are under God's law, that leads us to see natural law clearly as it is. Okay? In other words, where is natural law most clearly seen and understood? My thesis is that it is in the church. Okay? It is in the church where we recognize God's law that leads us to recognize natural law. Okay? And what happens is that society no longer can see natural law clearly. Yeah? And instead, what is happening in society is what Charles Taylor has called this overlapping consensus of moral order. That means we come together, we discuss, and we try to see what's overlapping consensus on what we can agree as a society as a whole on what is moral or not. Yeah? And so what is needed, I think, is for the church, even as we are under God's law, with our clear understanding of natural law, to bring that into the discussion as we engage with wider society. And this has to be done through discussion and deliberation. Yeah? So that's the first point. Next one. Sorry, very quickly. Challenges within the church to the biblical norms of marriage. I think we've all seen this really. Breakdown of Christian marriages. Pastor Chris has shown us the stats. According to one report, 7,623 out of 25,434 marriages in Singapore, that is 30%, ended in divorce in 2020. Okay? Now, I don't know how many of these marriages that ended up in divorces were Christian marriages. Recent surveys in the USA suggest that approximately 20 to 25% of Christian marriages end in divorce. Yeah? And I think in Singapore, what makes it harder is this consumeristic churches make it harder to shepherd our members. You see, back in Geneva, Calvin's day, if a couple divorced or something happened within, the pastor was bound to know, right? Yeah. And that couple can't say, okay, let's go to another church where we can start afresh and anew, and so forth. They couldn't. Whereas today, it's so easy. Why? Because we have this whole mindset of consumeristic churches. Makes it very hard to shepherd our members. So our members go through bad marriages, they divorce, what do? They move to another church, they begin their life anew there. And nobody knows. Right? Next one. Next point. Also, other challenges, non-marital cohabitation, rising trend among Christian young adults. I don't know, this is something that I have to ask. It was quite interesting. One of my fellow colleagues, pastors, he held a marriage preparation retreat in our church. And then along the way, he discovered that actually there were a lot of Christian young adults who were cohabitating together before marriage. Yeah. Why? Because so expensive, property prices, everything, there's no other way. And it was seemingly like quite an acceptable thing to do nowadays. So the questions are there, some challenges that we face. Next. And after the repeal 1378, this is a big question which I'm concerned about. How are we going to respond as the church, as the denominational church, as more and more same-sex couples start appearing in church? We have to be prepared for that. Yeah? And here is a point where I want to ask that I wonder whether for many of our young people and young adults, the minute they discover that they may have a same-sex attraction, straight away their reasoning goes, I therefore cannot be a Christian. That's the conclusion that they jump to. And that's when they start to move further and further away from the faith. So my question is there space for us in the mainline denominational churches to continue to engage with some of our youth and young adults as they may be discovering things about themselves while not letting go of our biblical norms? Yeah, so that's a question that I have. No answers. Next. We also need to, from the study itself, I think there's another thing that we need to do is we need to help the pastors of our churches to be shepherds of their families. Okay? And here, the first point that I bring up is a very sensitive point, remuneration. How much are we paying our pastors? So I did bring up at the Synod AGM that I saw an advertisement. A bus captain now earns $4,000 starting salary. And I was asking myself, is that what we're paying some of our starting pastors? Yeah. And this is and the starting salary is really one thing, but also the annual increments. I mean, I discovered, I will not name the church, yeah, but I discovered to my surprise that one of the pastors, the annual increment was only $50 a year. I paused for a while to let that sink in for all of us. $50 a year. It's becoming harder and harder to count the costs. I teach in a theological seminary, and I really think it's becoming harder and harder for many of our young people to count the cost and enter into full-time paid Christian ministry. It's getting harder and harder compared to the time that I went into full-time paid Christian ministry compared to now. And I will say this up front, okay, that I think if entering into full-time paid Christian ministry, you do not have a spouse who is able to earn a rather good income, yeah, in that sense, it is going to be very, very hard for you to sustain the family in today's Singapore society. So this is really something which I hope all across, starting with our leadership, we can really start giving greater thought into this. Yeah. The next point. Ensuring that our younger pastors are able to be there for their families and children, especially in the early years. And here is a point that I'd like to highlight. That many pastors, we work Saturday, Sundays. Okay, because some churches do a Saturday service. But guess what? Saturday, Sunday is the time where our families, where our young children, they are most free. Yeah? And Monday is or Monday, Tuesday, or any other day during the weekday is our day off in that sense. But when we are having our day off, our kids are in school, our wives are at work. There's nobody to spend the day off with other than ourselves. Yeah? So can we think about as church leadership how we can help, especially pastors with young children, to give them at least one day during the weekend where they can spend time with their families? Yeah, something for us to think through. Next point. And for us as pastors, allow yourself to receive care from the flock, even as you care for them. Okay? The last application point. Moving our churches to become families. Okay? Where I think by and large there are two kinds of churches within our presbytery. There is the large church, well-resourced, well-programmed, very easy to attract newcomers, but guess what? Very hard to create a family feel. Yeah? And in this type of churches, the larger churches, I think what's important are small groups. Small groups are vitally important. Training of small group leaders is very important. Okay? And then on the other hand, we have the smaller church. The smaller churches, a family feel is immediately felt. Okay, so I've been with, and in fact, some of our churches may be family churches, generation to generation. But what's the danger for such churches? It's the danger of stagnation. Everybody is so familiar with everybody that you won't grow out of it. Huh? And in these cases, churches need a deliberate paradigm shift. Yeah. Challenging task. I have no answers for that. Why? We consumerist mindset, okay, that's battling against us, where people think church is not a family that I belong to. No, church is not. Please don't call church a family. I don't want the church as a family. Huh? But rather, church is a service provider to assist me on my individual personal journey of faith. So if the church doesn't help me in my personal journey of faith, I go to another church. Yeah, I don't want to think of church as family. Can you see? Yeah, faith is individual journey. Yeah, that's a consumerist mindset. The other one is commitment phobia. Church as family seems really high commitment. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that yet. We all live in a commitment phobia society. Huh? And so sometimes when we ask our members to participate more, they're generally very phobia towards it. Yeah? And my last point is a somewhat pessimistic point, but I hope to see that it's realistic. Maybe we just need to be realistic with how far we can go with this idea of church as family. Yeah. And to understand and to try our very best and to engage in it, but yet at the same time be realistic about our expectations. Good. Yeah. Thank you.
I would like to suggest we stay a bit longer, shorten our lunch a bit, and we can have perhaps the next 7 minutes answering questions, especially questions for Pastor Edmund. So is there a QR code now? Yeah, there's a QR code. This is for session 2. If you have questions, please keep them in. Sometimes there's a problem when the speakers speak too clearly. There's no question. Exactly, the first comment can be excellent, but no question. Now I'll give you a minute. Think about it. There are lots of things to reflect upon. Okay, there's a few questions coming in already. Wow, very practical questions. Edmund, you can choose which one you want to answer. A lot of questions, okay. Maybe since we are on the perspective of theological historical theology, maybe I'll start with this question. From the Old and New Testaments to Calvin's time, there has been different models of marriage. Are you saying that Calvin said it the best?
Sorry, I'm not too sure about the question, but I don't think there have been different models of marriage, but marriage all the way from the beginning of scriptures in Genesis 1 all the way to Calvin's day and all the way even to what we as a church need to hold on to today has only been one model, and that is heteronormous marriage, heterosexual marriage between a man and a woman that is intended for a lifetime. Yeah.
Okay, I will go to a practical question with regard to same-sex couples. How can we welcome them but at the same time hold on to our biblical values?
This is a very tough question to work through. And maybe one aspect that I can think about is welcoming them to attend the church service, to hear the gospel, but perhaps drawing the line and the boundary at the level of church membership. Yeah. Whereby if they want to become members of the church, that is the point where we require them to adhere to the biblical norm for sexuality. But before that line, we really welcome them, and we should be glad if they are willing to come into our doors and to listen to the gospel being preached and so forth. So that could be one example of a line that is drawn. In that.
Wow, lots of good questions. I find it very hard to choose. Okay. How about a question on the consumerist mindset? Because I see a few questions regarding the consumerist mindset. So one of it is you mentioned the church and family and the current view of consumerist mindset. Does that mean that one should never change should never change or never attend other churches?
No, it doesn't mean that. So I give you an analogy. For a while before I joined Trinity Theological College, I was a pastor in charge of discipleship groups at ARPC. And every now and then I have somebody who come up to me and say, Pastor, can I change DG? Because this doesn't work out for me and I want to change to another discipleship group. And my answer is always, I may allow you this change, but if in a few months' time you come up to me again requesting for another change, then that is where I may have to say to you the very hard truth that the problem might not lie with the discipleship group, the problem might lie with you. Can you see? So I like to apply the same thing over to us here. It doesn't mean that, in order to reject this consumerist mindset, I must stay with my church forever and there's no grounds whatsoever for me to leave the church. No, I'm not saying that. There may be certain occasions and certain factors which may result in us changing churches, but we find ourselves hopping from church to church and never really staying in one. Then we may really have to ask ourselves the hard question of whether it's the problem more of me rather than whichever church that I'm attending.
There's another question that says postmodernism is the reason why many of our views are rejecting objective truth and also rejecting church authority and discipline. How can we bridge that gap? I think
postmodernism, in the early stages, it was heading towards a kind of individual relativism. That means it's relative for me, and as an individual, I get to decide, what's true, what's not true, what works, what doesn't work. I can tell you that many of the postmodernists are also moving away from this because they realize it doesn't work. If everybody is judged of how we should live our lives, if we are living alone, then that's fine and proper. But if we're living with other people, then there's no way, right? There needs to be some kind of a norm that governs it. So even many of the younger postmodernists are realizing this fact. So they're starting to appeal to community. They're starting to appeal to intra-community rules and which they adhere to. And maybe that is one way in which we can appeal to the younger people who are questioning, which is bringing them back to Christian tradition. To help explain to them why is it that the church has always taught this way, why has the church always held on to a certain value, a certain view, and to show that the new thinking is actually the one that needs to be established rather than the traditional way of thinking about it. So I personally think that this could be one way in which we engage engage with our youth and young adults who may be caught up with the whole idea of postmodernism.
Perhaps I want to just use one more minute. I think the idea about bridging the gap with youth is very much relationship, right? So when we build relationship with them, they are always very willing to listen to us, even if our ideas are very different from them. Okay, last question before lunch. If church leaders are unable to manage their family well, does that mean that we should stop them from serving as leader?
I think this is something which needs to be handled very sensitively on both ends. That means the church leader himself, okay, if he or she reaches the conviction that because of whatever that's happening in my family, it calls for me to step down, then I think the church leadership should respect the leadership in that sense. Okay? On the other hand, there's also the aspect of the church leadership which needs to come together, convene together, discuss, and really see what is particular to the case of the individual church leader. I give an example. I know of a church in which one of the church leaders, his son was undergoing through some feelings of gender dysphoria, and exploring transgenderism and so forth, in that. And I had another church leader comment to me and said that because this church leader's son was going through that church leader actually shouldn't be a church leader anymore, in that sense. And I had to bring up very quickly to this other church leader who brought up the issue to me to say that it really depends. I mean, we have to see how the church leader himself thinks about this issue and whether what is the church leader's views, rather than to rush into a simplistic conclusion that because this particular church leader's children is turning out in a slightly different manner or different way, therefore the church leader should step down from leadership immediately. So I think such cases really need to be discussed together, prayed through, and arrive collectively as a church leadership body, rather than a kind of individual mandate that's taken out.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pastor Edmund.